What have we got over here? This looks interesting. The Sauropod picture.
Approximately 100 million years ago, southwestern North America, a floodplain populated by the dwindling populations of the giants that used to enjoy plentiful numbers and exotic diversification, the killing grounds for a variety of predators, both big and small. There lived giant groundhogs with razor-sharp daggers on their feet for disemboweling anything unlucky enough to find themselves in their path, and a massive beast that hunted down the biggest land animals ever to walk the land. This predator had teeth shaped like a great white shark and a hump on its back to match. This savage beast used its meat-hooked talons to tear into the sides of its prey. The high-spined reptile of ATOKA County, Acrocanthosaurus ATOKENSIS. Non-avian theropod dinosaurs, plucky, bipedal carnivores with a penchant for eating their fellow animals, reached their largest and most impressive forms during the Cretaceous. Small theropods, like the early coelurosaurs, including animals like CALAMOSAURUS, gave rise to tyrannosauroids in the forms of Timerlingia and APPALACHIOSAURUS, while the ceratosaurians brought about the short-muzzled abelisaurids like CARNOTAURUS. The group that spurred some of the largest carnivorous dinosaurs that we know of evolved in the Jurassic and culminated in the Cretaceous. This family is the Allosauroids. The Jurassic Allosauroids had diversified into various new clades of forms during the mid-Cretaceous. One of these, CARCHARODONTOSAURIDAE. The CARCHARODONTOSAURIDAE, or shark-toothed reptiles, consisted mostly of large-body hypercarnivores with narrowly tapering skulls, high-ridged backs, and shark-like teeth. A prime example of the family, and one of the best-known species of Carcharodontosaurids, is Acrocanthosaurus ATOKENSIS from the early Cretaceous of North America. The Great Depression was one of the biggest economic disasters in United States history, and it affected not just all of North America, but also pretty much the rest of the world. The U.S. President at the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, crafted the New Deal. This New Deal was a series of programs, reforms, and regulations enacted in the early 1930s to help bring the country back from the brink. One of the programs created to produce new jobs and give more opportunities for people to scrape themselves out of the hole that they were put in by the reckless spending of the country during the 1920s and effectively pull themselves up by their bootstraps was the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. The purpose of this program was to rebuild and beautify infrastructure wherever it may be needed. It is this program that we owe thanks in creation of many of the semi-permanent amenities we now enjoy, like the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, Dinosaur Park in South Dakota, the Riverwalk in San Antonio, and literally tens of thousands more projects and infrastructural support. Along with these projects, museums were erected with the help of the eager workers given the means by which to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And along with the museums came the hordes of field workers helping paleontologists to secure new finds and return them to the controlled environment of a museum. Why have we extrapolated about the New Deal to such degree? Well, this is where Acrocanthosaurus comes in. The first remains of the high-spined reptile were uncovered in 1940, and throughout the rest of the 40s by paleontologists J. Willis Stovall and Juan Langston Jr., as well as a giant team of Works Progress Administration workers. Fossils of the first specimen, eventually named OMNH 10147, were reported by Joe Southern of the Works Progress Administration in ATOKA, Oklahoma. Southern told Stovall, then of the Oklahoma Museum of Natural History, about the find, and teams were issued out to uncover the enormous remains. This specimen became the paratype specimen and consisted of dorsal and caudal vertebrae, ribs, chevrons, the pubis, a little bit of the top part of the femur, a piece of the tibia, and some foot bones. Not a whole heck of a lot, but it was the incredible size of these bones that told Langston and Stovall that what they had was something new, and something quite unlike anything found before it, and still rather unique to this day. Stovall and Langston, as well as the crew chief of the ATOKA County WPA, Arthur Hutchins, divided work up amongst the teams, with some people working on excavating the Acrocanthosaurus specimen and some people prospecting around the surrounding areas for more fossil material. And more fossil material they did find. Lots and lots of it. Overall, 9 fossil sites were designated in the area, and along with them came the second specimen of Acrocanthosaurus. A mere 1.2 kilometers, or 0.75 miles away from the first skeleton, lay a second Acrocanthosaurus skeleton. This one much more well preserved than the first. The first skeleton was discovered in soft yellow sandstone, while the second skeleton was found in dark reddish-brown sandy shale, both of which were encased in a rind of stone that accrued over millions of years. Included in the second specimen, designated as both the holotype and numerical name OMNH 10146, how about we name this one Hutchins? There were cervical vertebrae, dorsal vertebrae, and only a few caudal vertebrae, as well as cervical ribs, parts of the rib cage, chevrons, part of the pubis, and much of the ischium, neural spines, part of the coracoid, really small fragments of the gastralia, and pieces of one of the femurs, and most of both fibulae and tibiae, but most importantly, the back half of the skull. Stovall and Langston knew these two were the same type of animal because they come from the same time and place, and the vertebrae gave them away as the same type of animal because no other animal has neural spines like them. After World War II, which also ended the Works Progress Administration, Langston returned to the University of Oklahoma to name and describe the fossil remains, which had been sitting untouched since their discovery. In Langston's unpublished master's thesis, he had named the creature Acrocanthosaurus ATOKENSIS in 1947. But by the time Langston and Stovall went to formally publish their findings in a scientific paper in 1950, the name had been changed to Acrocanthosaurus ATOKENSIS. The next Acrocanthosaurus discovery was made 30 years later, in 1982. 112.6 kilometers away from the 1950s Acrocanthosaurus site, Christy Silvey collected a few bones near Idabel, Oklahoma, and took them to resident paleontologist Dr. Rich Cifelli in 1987. And by the end of the 1980s, a new Acrocanthosaurus had been found. paleontologists from the Oklahoma Museum of Natural History again came out to recover the fossils. And it is thanks to their efforts that we can introduce you to Fran, the Acrocanthosaurus, the most complete thus found. Fran, or NCSM 14345, was found in soft, coarse-grained salt and pepper sandstone, with much of the fossil material encased in a rind of the same stone. Once excavated, the remains were taken to the Black Hills Institute, the infamous institution that uncovered Sue the Tyrannosaurus, described by Philip J. Curie and Kenneth Carpenter, and eventually sold to the North Carolina Museum of Natural History. All in all, Fran's skeleton included most of the skull, ribs, cervical ribs, scapula, coracoid, humerus, radius, ulna, metacarpals, manual phalanges and unguals, gastralia, sacral vertebrae, caudal vertebrae, plenty of isolated neural spines and chevrons, ilium, ischium, and the femur, fibula, tibia, pes, metatarsals, and pedal phalanges and unguals of the right leg. Now we're getting a better picture of the beast. 2 more specimens would be uncovered, 2 more that helped to round out the image of the high-spined reptile. The next skeleton was found in 1990, west of Fort Worth, Texas, by the Southern Methodist University of Dallas. Described in a master's thesis by Jerry Harris, the remains of this 4th specimen were painfully chipped out of medium to fine-grained sandstone that had been hardened to concrete because of calcite entering in between the sand grains. Given the numerical designation SMU 74646, this new specimen was smaller than Fran, but had some bones she did not have, and also had bones the first 2 specimens were lacking, which helps to fill in the gaps left by partial skeletons. SMU 74646, which we named the Dallas specimen, included parts from the back of the lower jaw and skull, cervical, dorsal, sacral, and caudal vertebrae, with their cervical and dorsal ribs, the scapula, the pubis and ischium, both femurs, gastralia, and a foot bone. The discovery of Dallas increased the known range of the genus down south further than had been known before, but the range of Acrocanthosaurus would only increase with the next discovery. The most recent Acrocanthosaurus specimen discovered was UM20796, which we named JANETTE, discovered in 2008 in eastern Bighorn County, Wyoming by Mick Demick, then of the University of Michigan. Described in 2012, this tiny Acrocanthosaurus, compressed flat under the stress of millions of years underneath the layers of the earth, was found in dark, brick-red, silt-rich mudstone. JANETTE was a juvenile and the most fragmentary, including only the femur, top part of the tibia, part of the pubis, a caudal vertebrae, and a dorsal vertebrae. The find increases the range of the animal to be potentially as far south as the Mexican border, upwards to the Rocky Mountains. Although these 5 specimens, Adam, Hutchins, Fran, Dallas, and JANETTE, are the only ones known currently, other fragments, like teeth, bits of vertebrae, or even unidentifiable bones have been found from all over North America that are only tentatively called Acrocanthosaurus. Teeth have been recovered from Arizona, Maryland, Utah, and Canada, which would mean Acrocanthosaurus was roaming the entire continent at one time or another. Unfortunately, most of these pieces cannot be confidently called Acrocanthosaurus remains because they are so small and could come from any number of other animals, including theropods we have yet to find. bones are not the only remains of Acrocanthosaurus to be preserved through the fossilization process of the geologic record, for trace fossils are another form of remains an animal can leave behind. In the case of Acrocanthosaurus, footprints have been found that may belong to an animal like Acrocanthosaurus, and fossilized scrapes in the ground have been defined as belonging to the mating behavior of some form of large theropod dinosaur. The exact creator of the tracks and the scrapes cannot and could never be known for certain, since no fossils have been found dead in their tracks, so to speak, with these traces, nor has there been any fossils nearby. The trace fossils date to a similar time and are generally in the same region in which Acrocanthosaurus fossils are found. So it is possible, since Acrocanthosaurus or forms like it were the only giant theropod around the time in the region, as far as we know. One of the most famous set of fossil trackways that even the layperson may be aware of hails from Dinosaur Valley State Park in Glen Rose, Texas. This set of tracks, set along the Paluxy River, shows the impressions of at least a dozen sauropod dinosaurs and at least 4 theropods. The sauropod tracks, named Brontopodus, all move in one direction as a group. It cannot be known for sure if they were all traveling together at the same time or if different individuals or groups were walking in the same direction at different intervals, giving the impression, both literally and metaphorically, that they were moving together. The same can be said for the theropod footprints, as they are inconclusive as to the animals that made them and whether or not they were truly moving together, or if it is an illusion created by the geology of fossilization. The tracks come from the Glen Rose Formation, which dates to 115 to 105 million years ago. Acrocanthosaurus fossils have been recovered from this formation, and the tracks preserved in the Glen Rose trackway have been found to also come from the Glen Rose Formation. The footprints are big enough and the right shape to suggest that they may have been made by Acrocanthosaurus, or a dinosaur like it, as they traveled in the same direction as the sauropods, which could have been anything from the Macronarian Pleuroceolus, the Somphospondylan sauropod, ASTROPHOCAUDIA, or even the immense SAUROPOSEIDON. Unfortunately, as stated before, these footprints cannot confidently be called Acrocanthosaurus footprints, so they don't technically count as fossilized remains of the animal, but they count for something, showing possible behavior and movement of the animal when it was alive, if it indeed was the track maker. All of the skeletons found of Acrocanthosaurus show quite a formidable animal. Many prehistoric animals are known only from one specimen, and no new ones are ever found. Sometimes science hits the jackpot, and we might find one more skeleton. There are rare times when enormous groups of animals are discovered, or even the same kind of animal keeps popping up in different places in slightly different times. These are the finds that make people scream.
My God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm. What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure? Stay calm!
For there is nothing better than getting a second skeleton to get a good comparison. Now, 5 skeletons may not seem like much, but 5 skeletons are more than enough to tell us a grand story that deserves its spot around a campfire on a summer camping trip. Acrocanthosaurus ATOKENSIS was one of the largest theropod dinosaurs from North America. The biggest skeletal remains found suggest an animal that could reach upper limits in lengths up to 11.5 meters or 38 feet and a weight of at most 7.99 tons. And the largest individuals could probably have reached past 13.7 meters or 45 feet and 8.5 tons. That's a tad more than twice the length of the African elephant of today, but nearly the same amount of weight. Quite a mouthful. It seems quite obvious to anyone with half a brain that Acrocanthosaurus was a carnivore, but we know it was a carnivore, and not just any carnivore by the shape of its teeth. The teeth of Acrocanthosaurus are quite unlike the later groups of theropod dinosaurs from North America, like the Tyrannosaurus or the sea-going, fish-eating Spinosaurs of Africa. Acrocanthosaurus's teeth are thin, blade-like things. They have serrations going up and down in front and back, and were all roughly the same size. These teeth were not meant to pulverize and mash a prey animal in a single bite. These teeth were adapted for a specific job. The job they were best at was slicing off big steaks off an animal it was hunting. This tells us the animal would have been more likely to rush a prey animal, tear into it, peeling off pieces of flesh and skin, and falling back to a safe position, until the poor prey animal got too tired to fight back, blood loss being its downfall. A nasty way to go. The skull of Acrocanthosaurus is also unique. Teardrop-shaped and narrow from the sides, the skull does not have the extreme muscle attachments and bulges that a Tyrannosaurus skull has. Nor did the animal have true binocular vision like you or me. No. Acrocanthosaurus had moderately binocular vision, which means that its eyes were set, more or less, pointing out on either sides of the head. But since the head was so thin, the eyes may have had a rudimentary binocular vision, but that would not have stopped it from turning its head to face you with one eye at a time, like your not-so-friendly neighborhood African gray. The eye would have allowed the great predator some truly awesome sight. Sclerotic rings are little plates of bones that sit within the eyes of birds and most of their family tree, the archosaurs, which includes, you guessed it, the dinosaurs, as well as the pterosaurs, any number of weird critters that weren't up to snuff, and the very unrelated marine reptiles. These rings of bone probably help to support the eye itself. It gives the animal that has them a way to focus in on objects in their environment, but also leaves their eyes rigid and locked in place, so to speak. We bring up sclerotic rings because some Acrocanthosaurus remains have been found with these rings preserved. And this allows us to get a rough image of how big the pupil of the eye was, as well as the rest of the eye. The size of the eye is important, since the bigger the eye and the bigger the pupil, and the bigger it is in comparison with its user and all other animals with eyes, the more likely it was to have some pretty damn good vision. And Acrocanthosaurus had some pretty damn good vision. It had a relatively big eye and a big pupil that would have allowed the animal to discern not-so-tasty background objects in the environment from the very tasty walking drumsticks it was after. But with what would this absolute unit take down its wriggling, struggling prey? Acrocanthosaurus had these flesh-peeling steak knives in its mouth, and it had relatively good jaw muscles to inflict a bite with these flesh-peeling steak knives. But what other cutlery was the big beefy boy equipped with to slice and dice its way through the occasional herbivore? Glad you asked. As we move down the body, we'll see the animal had a relatively short, thick neck attached to a robust torso. The vertebrae of the neck show the animal probably had some extra thick, the 3 C's, muscles connecting the back of the head to the neck and shoulders. These muscles would have allowed the animal to survive the forces of torsion. When its head was being dragged around by the animal, its jaws were sinking into. While it was carving out slices of herbivorous dinosaur ham, its short but powerful forearms were doing the rest of the job. The forearms of Acrocanthosaurus are short. There's no other way to say it. Humans have pretty long arms. Our ancestors used them to swing through the canopy, and then our other ancestors used them to forage and hunt. We enjoy the conveniences of them now for too many activities to mention. In comparison, Acrocanthosaurus had really frickin' tiny arms. But take a look at other theropod dinosaurs with tiny arms, and we'll see that the arms of Acrocanthosaurus were not really as small. In fact, the smaller your arms are, the bigger and stronger your head and neck tend to be, which is a trade-off the Tyrannosaurs made long after the demise of Acrocanthosaurus. Acrocanthosaurus comes from a lineage of animals that use their arms to hold down and disembowel their food before eating it. And Acrocanthosaurus may have been no different. The arms of Acrocanthosaurus are attached to an enormous set of shoulder blades. These blades of bone, in conjunction with the arms and the enormous eagle talons that cap the fingers, would have given the animal quite a grip. Phil Center and others in 2005 analyzed a cast of the forelimbs of Acrocanthosaurus and found the animal could move its arms back to a horizontal position, but was incapable of bringing them out, up, and sideways to the same height as the shoulder. In the same study, it was found it had hyperextendable fingers caused by a large presence of cartilage at the base of the carpals and digits. The data and results from the study by Center and colleagues suggest Acrocanthosaurus performed prey acquisition first with its jaws and then gradually pulled the animal closer and restrained it with its robust, clawed forelimbs, giving a big old bear hug of death to any poor son of a bitch that was too slow for Acrocanthosaurus' springy legs. You're probably thinking, the arms and the head is not exactly the most noticeable feature about this particularly deadly, creepy creature. And we'd respond with, hey, they were sensitive about their little arms, okay? Don't make its compensation complex any worse. Everyone's beautiful, no matter how ugly and scary they are. But that's not the kind of video you're here for, so we won't waste your time with animal social justice, as if that is a real thing. The very obvious reason as to why Acrocanthosaurus got its name, which means high-spined reptile, is not because it was preserved right next to a dank stash of hash, nor was it a fan of White Castle or In-N-Out. Acrocanthosaurus got its name because of its big, fat set of neural spines. These spines start at the very first vertebrae of the neck, where the head attaches, and they kept going all the way, until halfway down the tail, which is where they started winding down, shrinking until they looked more like normal caudal vertebrae. When looking at the animal's skeleton, it looks like it went through a phase in the 90s and has yet to get with the times. A fin of neural spines run down its back, reaching a full 61 centimeters or 2 feet at the tallest point. What was the animal using it for? That's the great mystery, isn't it? There are very few other dinosaurs that have ridges of bone erupting out of the vertebrae, and even fewer have the condition seen in Acrocanthosaurus.
And if you want to know how it used its spine, stay tuned for the next episode of the Sauropod Butcher.